Hey there, everybody. Undoubtedly, you have heard a lot, probably too much, about the most recent settlement between the National Association of Realtors and plaintiffs in several antitrust cases around the country, and the Department of Justice has been involved with it on the federal level. There's been a lot going on, and that's not something that's happened instantly, even though it probably feels that way because of the headlines and the sort of instant nature of reporting that we get sometimes today. But these lawsuits have been unfolding for several years, many years, and these practices that have developed in the industry have been building for decades. And so this is something that is going to be a major change, a major shift in the industry. But at the same time, I got to tell you, in reading some of these articles and in looking at some of the commentary, I am just I kind of giggle a little bit. I'll be honest with you because I've never seen such a, my hair is on fire moment for so many people in my industry and for maybe so many people in the media industry about a topic that clearly is not very well understood. And maybe that's why we had problems in the first place. So I am here today to express my opinions. These are my opinions. These are not the opinions of the National Association of Realtors. I have serious differences with a lot of the decisions that are made by leadership folks at the National Association of Realtors. I happen to think that the course of action they pursued and the way they defended these lawsuits led us to a much probably worse position than we needed to be in. Had they been open to recognizing some of the failures in the industry long ago and helped to be part of that change, then we wouldn't necessarily be here where everybody feels like it's just, oh my gosh, I don't know what's going to happen. So my goal is to just kind of bring some clarity and share with you the thoughts of somebody who's been around the block a time or two in this business, but also somebody who teaches antitrust law in classes and sees how poorly sometimes students understand it and how poorly the public understands it in a lot of cases, and why we maybe got here and where we go from here, at least in my opinion. I think it's important to talk about what will change in the industry, but maybe equally important to talk about what's not going to change. Contrary to popular opinion, um, there is nothing that's going to be changed in the law as a result of this settlement, at least not at this point. I'm not saying that legislation won't come at some point in the future that changes things, but right now there's no change in legislation. There will be absolutely nothing illegal in July when these rule changes take effect that's legal today. Nothing changes in that regard. The rule changes that they're talking about are rules for people who are members of the National Association of Realtors. Now, a big misconception for those not in our industry, because I know there are probably some people watching who are not real estate licensees. Not everybody who has a real estate license is a realtor. I know people think you get a license to become a realtor. That's just not true. The realtors are a trade organization. For lack of a better description, they are a union. They are not terribly different than the American Auto Workers unions or the unions for electrical workers or unions and trade organizations for dentists. The American Dental Association. It is an association of professionals, and it's a voluntary one, and not everybody's a member. And so these rule changes are only internal rule changes that the realtors have agreed to as part of their settlement to basically force their members to abide by these rule changes. So these are not impactful at all for people who are non-realtors. So one of the first things you need to probably ask a real estate agent if you think it's going to impact them is, are you a realtor? Maybe it doesn't impact them so much if they're not a realtor. But that being said, the realtors are a huge organization, and the overwhelming majority of residential real estate agents across the country are realtors. And so these rule changes do have a very real impact on what consumers see day to day when they're buying and selling homes. And so let's talk about those rule changes, and at least the ones that I think are worth mentioning here. The biggest one, which has to do with commissions and all the breathless reporting about the death of the 6% commission. Can't tell you how many times I've seen that headline in the last couple of weeks. Well, first of all, newsflash, there ain't no such thing as a magical 6% commission that everybody charges. At least there shouldn't be. If it's being presented that way by a real estate agent, then I apologize on behalf of that person, because they are poorly taught and they are practicing the business in the wrong manner. That is not how it should be presented to a consumer. That's not how it should work out in the real world. We are all individual brokerages and offices, and we all have our own fee structure, and we should set our fees based on what we think is fair compensation for the services we provide. No different than 1,000 other professionals set their prices based on services that they provide. Of course, there's a sense of competition. There always will be. This is capitalism after all. And so obviously real estate brokerages and models are going to look at maybe what other companies are doing and try to be competitive with that. But that does not mean that every seller in the United States is paying a 6% commission and that's being split equally where the buyer's agent's getting 3%. That's a lot of the portrayal that I've seen in articles about this settlement. And maybe that portrayal is at least part of the problem. And I don't mean the media's problem. I mean us as an industry. Maybe we have gotten so sloppy about talking about commissions that there really is the perception that there is this magical number that everybody adheres to. And that's wrong. It's not that way. It never has been that way. It shouldn't be that way. And no consumer who's buying or selling a house should feel like it's that way. I want to be clear about that. So what are these rule changes that realtors have to abide by? Well, the biggest one deals with not payment of commission, but advertising in something called the MLS, the Multiple Listings Service, advertising that offices will share a commission with an office who represents a buyer in the transaction, that offices who represent the seller have already negotiated a commission with the seller, and the seller has agreed that a part of that commission, it could be half, it could be a third, it could be 73.4%. It doesn't matter what part, but some part of that commission has been agreed to be paid to an office, an agent, a broker, whatever your terminology is in the state you're located in North Carolina here where I am, it would be broker or firm, that the seller and their agent have negotiated a commission, and some part of that commission is going to be shared or paid to offices representing the buyer. That will not change. That is not what is changing about the rule or proposed rule change in this settlement from the National Association of REALTORS. There is nothing that says that offices and sellers cannot still agree to compensate offices representing the buyer if they want to. What's changing is the way that that message is conveyed. Currently, it is very common for a listing office, the office representing a seller, to not only put the property in the multiple listing service and do all the marketing based on the multiple listing service and, all the features of the home and pictures and video and all those things that we've come to rely on when we search on websites, all the big websites that we do property searches on. They all feed from the multiple listing service. All their data comes from the multiple listing service. It is sort of the repository of all of the information. And it is developed as an industry standard, and one of the main uses of the MLS from the agent side was to convey that willingness to share a commission. And not only the willingness to share, but how much to share. Whether that was a flat rate, a flat percentage, a flat fee, a set percentage of the sales price, it didn't really matter what the model was for calculating that. It was literally a field in the MLS that only the agents could see, the public couldn't see it, that said, if you bring a buyer that you represent to our listing, then we will pay you this much out of the commission that we're charging the seller. So in effect, the seller was, when they were signing their listing agreement, they were agreeing to compensate their listing firm and to compensate the firm representing a buyer. The basis of these lawsuits, and I'm not going to get into the merit of the lawsuits. People will have varying opinions. I happen to think there was a lot of merit to the lawsuits. I read the arguments and early on thought they're going to win because they were solid arguments. Whether you agree with that or not, it's neither here nor there, because the judgment is what the judgment is, and the settlement is what the settlement is. But the basis of the arguments in a lot of these lawsuits was that sellers felt compelled to pay the buyer's agent, and to make this sort of blanket offer of any buyer's agent who brings us any buyer will get paid this percentage of the property. And the change in the rule that's proposed in the settlement simply says that the listing office can't put that in the MLS anymore. They can't put that offer in the MLS. That is not to say a seller cannot be willing to pay a commission. If seller wants to pay a commission to a buyer's agent, they are perfectly able to do so. There is nothing that the National Association of REALTORS can or will do about that. They do not regulate sellers. If a buyer wants to pay their agent directly, they can do that. If a buyer wants to ask the seller to pay their agent, they can do that. So nothing about the payment of commissions will necessarily change. What will change is the individuality of commissions for buyer's agents. Because up to this point, it was very common that a listing office would put an offer of compensation that was available to every office who showed the property. Now, essentially, when listing offices are not going to be able to convey that blanket offer to every other agent in their area through the MLS, it's going to need to be negotiated on a case-by-case basis. And so what that means is that there will be more legwork individually with every buyer and every offer about commissions, but it does not necessarily mean that commissions change or that they go away. It could lead to that. We don't know. That's the beauty of a competitive marketplace. For all I know, commissions could change. Commissions could stay the same. It's theoretically possible commissions could increase as a result of this individualized sort of practice. But all it does is makes it so that commissions will be negotiated on a case-by-case basis. And I'll show you just, a little bit of math with that here in just a second. The other big change and again, my opinion of big change in the proposed rules is more impactful in some states than in others. The other big change is that the National Association of REALTORS has proposed a rule that all of their members will use buyer agency agreements or buyer broker agreements, however you happen to refer to them in your area. In other words, the buyer will, in writing, hire the office that's going to represent them in order for that office to represent them. Now, that is not a change for us here in North Carolina. There are about 14 states where that is already mandatory, that if you want to represent a buyer in a transaction, you need a written buyer agency agreement, much the same as you need a written agreement representing the seller. That's not a change for us here in North Carolina. That will be a big change in some states that don't require that. And so they'll have to really adjust and learn how to present a written sort of agency agreement, employment contract, and be hired and talk about their compensation and talk about their commission with their clients. What might change for us here in North Carolina, and I suspect in a lot of other states, is the timing of when that buyer agency agreement is required. The way this proposed rule change is worded, it sounds to me like they're going to want realtors, again, because these rules only apply to realtors because they're realtor rules, that they're going to want realtors to have a written buyer agency agreement before they even begin working with that buyer. Currently in North Carolina, you can work with the buyer for a period of time, and it's only when that buyer client wants to make an offer that you are required to put that buyer agency agreement into writing. My thinking here, at least the best I can suss this out in my own mind, is the reason that rule change is desired by the plaintiffs in this case and by the Department of Justice apparently is so that buyers agents will have the commission conversation with their clients much more quickly, much earlier in the evolution of that relationship much sooner, and will make it clear what the expectations are of commission and payment with that buyer client. I think that's the rationale for that rule. So your mileage may vary as to how big of a change that will be in your state, depending on your regulatory rules and that sort of thing. But those are the two main changes that you're looking at from the standpoint of NAR and their settlement. Of course, they're going to pay about $415 million, which is a lot less than the $1.8 billion that the judgment was against them, and it releases them from liability, which is a good thing for the organization to get out from under that $1.8 billion judgment. And $415 million is a lot of money, but it's a lot less than $1.8 billion. And it also settles other lawsuits that are out there. So, those are kind of the two proposed rule changes, but I still think people are so overwrought about how this might impact commissions and the payment of commissions. I just want to show you how I think it's quite possible that it doesn't change them all that dramatically. So before I do this, this math is for representational purposes only. Now you're going to see I'm going to use that magical, mythical 6% number and 3% to a buyer's agent, not because those are numbers I charge. Factually, those are not numbers I charge. I would not have that discussion with you because you're not my client. If you were my client, we'd have a discussion about commission and what I would charge. I might not even charge you a percentage-based fee. I might charge you a flat fee. There are all kinds of models that we might go with if you were hiring me. But I'm showing it because if we're going to have the hysteria surrounding this magical 6% commission, we may as well use it for the basis of demonstration purposes. And so that's the only reason I had to pick a number. And I thought, well, hell, I'll pick the number that everybody's using anyway. And it doesn't matter what number, it all comes out the same for demonstration. So let's take a look then. I'm going to pull up what we call a seller net sheet. Now, a seller net sheet is something that we would present to a seller to help them evaluate offers, especially multiple offers, right? If a seller receives multiple offers on their property, they need to be able to sort of quickly compare side by side. Now, currently, and what you see here is I have shown 3 offers, one at $500,000, one at $510,000, one at $508,000. And the offers have other terms that are different. Now, some of these numbers you'll see are the same across the board. Like, for example, the seller's mortgage payoff is going to be the same no matter what the offer is. So $218,500, they got the same mortgage balance no matter what offer they accept. We would estimate some fees they would have to pay to an attorney to prepare their documents. And again, your mileage may vary depending on where you are. You might use a title company rather than a closing attorney. But we would always estimate that for a seller as an expense they would have to pay. This line right here is the line that everybody is talking about. This is the big point of discussion. And again, I'm not saying this is the right number or the wrong number. I'm not even saying this is a number that anybody should talk about. I'm talking about it because everybody else is talking about it, and we need a number to demonstrate something with. So when you look at this number, this is traditionally how a seller would be presented with their multiple offers. They would say, okay, well, I agreed to pay you this percentage fee, which is 6% in this case. And based on each one of the offers, that's a slightly different number because 6% of $500,000 is slightly different than 6% of $510,000 or 6% of $508,000. And so what you see in those numbers on that line right there, as you look across, is these numbers right here, what you see are different numbers and differences based on just the calculation of the commission at those various purchase prices. The other thing that you have to understand is that sellers are also asked routinely by buyers to pay some of the buyer's expenses that are associated with closing, call them closing costs. Seller paid closing costs. the sellers often ask as part of the offer to make a contribution toward buyer expenses. And so that's what you see in this line right here. So I'm going to clear the drawings out here. So right here in this line where it says closing expenses paid for the buyer, if you'll notice, you see different numbers. Here, this offer didn't ask for anything. We call that a clean offer. They didn't ask for anything as far as seller contribution to expenses. This one maybe asked for $7,500. This one asked for $2,500. Here's the thing, folks. As a listing broker, as a seller, you have no idea often why they want this money and what they're going to use it for. They may be using it to pay for a buy down on their loan and get a lower interest rate. They may be using it to pay discount points to get a lower interest rate. They may be using it to pay their origination fee on their loan. They may be using it to pay any of 50 different expenses that they may have as a part of that closing. And it really doesn't matter to the seller why they're asking for that credit or those seller paid closing costs. It just matters that they are, because we need to take it into account when we come up with the bottom line number for the offer. And that's really where I want to draw your attention. If you look down here at the bottom, we get the numbers that really matter to the sellers for these offers. And good listing agents will make this comparison when they have multiple offers, and they will show the seller, because so many numbers and so many moving pieces gets confusing, and they'll show the seller, here are your nets. Well, in the past, commission wasn't really part of the variableness of the offers. It was certainly part of evaluating the offers at big expense. But it was already negotiated in full and already set in full for the total commission that would be paid in the entirety of the transaction. In other words, buyers were not conditioning offers based on any requests about commission. What I think you're going to see, and this is where I go completely into speculation land, is something that looks more like this. These are the same offers. These are the same offers. But now if you'll notice, the seller maybe only agreed to pay a 3% fee. And again, I'm using their magic numbers, not my numbers, folks. There is no absolute number. It's just not there. But I'm using that because it's been such a published number to show that if the seller says, okay, I'm not paying a buyer's agent, I read all about that NAR settlement. Okay, great. So you still have to pay the listing office because they're listing your home for sale. So maybe you negotiate that at 3%. Maybe you negotiate that at 2%. Maybe you negotiate it at $1,000 or $15,000 or any number anywhere on a spectrum. It doesn't matter. But for this purpose, let's say they negotiated 3%. Well, that's obviously a big change in how much commission they're paying. But if you'll notice, it didn't change all that much the bottom line numbers down here. And that's because what I think you're going to see very commonly as we move forward is these closing costs that are requested by the buyer right here are going to be significantly larger in some offers. Maybe not all offers, but in some offers, because buyers are going to have already also negotiated a commission payment to the firm or the office that is representing them, assuming the buyer wants to have representation at all. So if the buyer wants to have representation and they've negotiated that they're going to be responsible for payment of a commission to their office, they have choices when they make their offer now. They maybe didn't have those choices previously, and that's why I think this transparency could be a really good thing for the industry and really open up some competitive juices and really get some different business models flowing on the buyer side of the transaction. Now the buyer can say to themselves, okay, I agreed to pay my office what I agreed to pay them. I can ask the seller for all of that. I can ask the seller for some of that. I can ask the seller for none of that, because I know that makes my offer look a little better. And that's what you see sort of reflected in these lines over here. The first offer, if you originally remember, the first offer asked for 0 in seller paid closing costs, right? If we go back to that one, they were asking for nothing, and now they're asking for $15,000. Well, look at what that did to the overall value of the offer. The seller's net is 247, 250, and the seller's net is also in the previous offer 247, 250. It didn't change a thing because it just so happened that the amount that they were planning to pay to a buyer's agent is what the buyer requested the seller to pay. Now, that's not to say the seller has to agree to that. They can, of course, counteroffer. I'm just presenting it as the buyers might make their offer. But it doesn't mean every offer is also going to stay exactly the same, because now every buyer will individually be negotiating their commissions and individually deciding on an offer by offer basis, do I want to ask the seller to help with this? Do I want to ask the seller to pay some of this? And so this number is going to be tremendously different offer to offer to offer. Some offers are going to come in where they're still not asking for any seller paid concessions. And the reality is that's going to really improve that offer in the eyes of the seller, as long as the net numbers down here at the bottom make sense. Because at the end of the day, the seller doesn't really care which offer asks them for more. They also don't even really care which offer is the highest number. So like, for example, in this case, the highest offer number is not the best offer cash-wise. And so I just think what we're going to end up with is a much more transparent system than what we have had in the past. I think that's where we're destined to go. Now, I really didn't feel like I could convey that without showing numbers and showing math. And I hope everybody understands that I'm not insinuating that there should be a certain amount negotiated by buyers. I happen to think it's brilliant that buyers are going to be able to handle this negotiation. Now, I do freely admit there are going to be winners and losers in this sort of a shift. I think that buyers who are largely already sort of stretched thin in these transactions and already asking sellers for a lot in the way of contributions will be disadvantaged, because they obviously won't have the cash to pay their own buyer's agent out of pocket, and they won't necessarily want to burden their offer by asking for the commission to be fully paid by the seller in some cases. And so therefore they'll be faced with the decision of being unrepresented in the transaction, or disadvantaging their offer by, piling more in there in the way of seller concessions. And those buyers, which are largely first-time home buyers or veterans and people who are dependent on high loan-to-value loans like VA loans and FHA loans, they may get chewed up in this process for a while. I do expect we're going to see some underwriting guideline changes. There are tremendous concerns about veterans and those that are using VA loans and whether or not they're even allowed to pay these kinds of fees. Right now, they're not. I do think you'll see underwriting changes there. This is not going to happen in a vacuum, folks. There will be regulatory changes and underwriting changes and lending guideline changes to enable this new and different path of paying commissions. What I don't think is necessary is the screaming and running with our hair on fire that the industry is forever going to fall apart, and that real estate agents are going to go the way of travel agents, or first of all, there are still travel agents out there who do a wonderful service for their clients. Whether you use them or not, that's up to you. The dynamic change, certainly. And the same thing will be true here. The dynamic will change. But this is an industry that has persevered through a lot of challenges that are in many ways, many magnitudes greater than this simple change is in these transactions. And I think the smart agents and those who really are willing to be transparent and explanatory to their clients and to negotiate with their clients in good faith about their compensation will find that there will still be a wealth of people who desire the representation of a buyer's agent. I think buyers still need representation in most transactions. Some buyers don't. Obviously, some are very savvy, but there are lots of buyers who just don't understand the complex processes that are involved in these transactions. Bluntly, there are a lot of agents who don't understand the complex processes involved in these transactions. And so that will, I think, in some ways be self-correcting with this new business model, because if a broker or an agent can't show their value, then they're not going to be able to negotiate a commission with their buyer client. But overall, I don't think that you're going to see a substantial shift in long term. Short term, everything gets disrupted, everything gets thrown into a meat grinder. But I mean, when you're talking a couple years out, a year out, a couple years out, I think we're going to fall into a new dynamic, a new norm. This is largely the way commercial real estate brokerage has been done for a very long time, where you negotiate with your own broker, your own agent, how much you're going to pay them, not dependent on some, shared or co-brokered commission coming from the other side. So I'm happy to, engage the conversation with anybody who wants. I do not pretend to be some know-it-all, be-all expert of antitrust law or brokerage in general, but I do have a fair amount of experience with, conveying these topics to people. And I think I understand some of the disconnects that we have between the public and the brokerage industry, and some of the disconnects that we have between the current practices and the way the laws would intend us to practice real estate. And I think if we can bridge those gaps, it's all going to be just fine. I'm not trying to be Pollyanna. That's not me. I'm also not trying to be fatalistic, because that's not me either. I try to be pretty practical and pretty level-headed about what we need to do as an industry and how we move forward with things. And I do think there is a moving forward with this, and there will be growing pains. There's always growing pains, and those growing pains will create opportunities for those who are willing to grow and who are willing to change, and those growing pains will create pain for those who are not willing to grow and willing to change. But that's always been the case. It is the nature of any healthy and vibrant and growing industry. And for my fellow real estate professionals out there, whether you're realtors or not, I want you to double down, and I want you to make sure you're doing the right thing for your clients. I want you to make sure that your clients understand you and understand your value and understand what you bring to a transaction, because I know what you can bring to the transaction. You know what you can bring to the transaction. Just make sure you deliver on that every single time. Make sure you always are looking out for their best interest, and that they know you're looking out for their best interest. And I think that your commission and compensation discussions will largely go in a way that you're very comfortable with, and that your clients are very comfortable with, because they'll see the value there. What I don't think you should do is, act as if somehow you've been wronged by the world. I mean, I have seen every hysterical reaction from people who should be calmer, about how the bureaucrats are coming to take their money, and how dare they come and do this and tell me that. And that. It's not all that, folks. It's not all that. It's a settlement and a lawsuit. That's all. Lawsuits happen every day. This happens to be a really large one. It happens to be a really large settlement. But at the end of the day, it's one organization changing a couple of rules. They're not rewriting the laws. They're not rewriting the rule book. They're not throwing out the system. They're just changing a couple of rules that are very integral to how things work currently. And so therefore, we will have to adjust, and we'll have to make changes. But I just wanted to share my thoughts. So many of you have asked. If you found it beneficial, that's wonderful. If you didn't, I'm sorry I wasted your time. But hopefully you did get something out of it. And you're more than welcome to shoot me an email if you'd like. It's really easy to find me. I'm just Travis at travtalks.com. And you can always email me. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can, of course, leave comments on the video if you'd like to. But I think the more we discuss, the more healthy engagement we have about the topic, the better off we're all going to be. Thanks, everybody, and I hope you have a wonderful day, whatever day it happens to be, wherever you are. It's ACC Championship Day for me, so go Heels. Talk to you soon.